Hi, I'm Esin, and welcome to Metal Monday, where I talk about albums new and old that I recommend you listen to so you can start your week off right. Now in partnership with Tempelores magazine at Tempelores.com, home to the craziest, most awesome bunch of metalheads that you are ever going to meet. Link in the description down below, please give them a visit. Now the state of Florida is famous, or rather it's infamous for a lot of things, chief among them being the sheer amount of insanity that goes on there on a daily basis. I mean, news blurbs about Florida men and women just liberally indulging in their most insane desires is pretty common. I mean, the place is crazy enough that it has spawned its own tradition of death metal, for fuck's sake. Yeah. So with that amount of crazy just gathered in one place, I think it was just a matter of time before it reached critical mass and spilled over, most likely in the form of a crazy awesome black metal record, and lo and behold, that has happened. The album that I'm going to talk about today is the debut release of a band that has not only formed in 2020, but also saw fit to release their first album, a full-length no less, in that very same year as well. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, this is Gravenchalice's Apparition. What you're going to find on Apparition is atmospherically sound, highly driven, really heavy black metal with heaps of melody, lots of interesting twists and turns, and a shit ton of moody atmospheres. In terms of the basic instrumentation, the guitar work primarily consists of these down-tuned, dissonant, but really heavy set, really crushingly oppressive, and at times really depressive, but always highly melodic riffs played one after the other. This is laid on top of relentless drumming that churns out blast beats by the dozen, just sort of pounding you into a miserable mess. And all of this sets the stage for the vocals, and the vocals don't take the usual black metal route of high-pitched shrieks, but instead opt to deliver you this gravelly, throaty growls that are more reminiscent of doom death, that are highly intelligible and add lots of emotion to the proceedings. You might have noticed there that I made no mention of a plodding, grumbling, really thick bass or whatever, because there is zero bass presence on this album. In fact, the only thing that proved, or at least provided evidence for the existence of bass, is a transitional part on the penultimate track, Missio Dei, where everything else gets softer and you finally get to hear a bass guitar. Other than that, there is zero bass presence on this thing whatsoever, to the point where even if you were to look up the band members online, you are not going to find anyone listed under this band that plays bass. I'm a big fan of bass presence in metal albums. Like, it doesn't really matter to me if it's just following along with the drums or the guitars. I would like for the bass to be there, and moreover, I would like for it to be audible. The fact that Apparition does not have any bass presence, to me at least, mars the listening experience a little bit and robs the music of that little bit of extra depth that could have carried it over into something even more extraordinary than it already is. The gap left in Apparition by the absence of the low end is actually filled in with pretty impressive and extensive guitar work that makes great use of the band's death and doom influences throughout. At its heart, Apparition is indeed a black metal album, but instead of going down the route of providing you lots of thin, tremolo-picked riffs that don't really have that much of a presence on the lower end of the scale, they instead bring to you black metal riffs played more or less in the style of death metal and with the tones of doom metal. So for the bulk of the album, the kinds of riffs that you're going to hear, with the notable exception of a passage in the second half of the song Behind Her Veil and a solo section in the fourth track, Missio Dei, the riffs that you're gonna hear are going to be of the chunky, down-tuned death metal variety played in the style of black metal. Now, when married to the relentless assault of blast beats and the low growls that the vocals vocals provide, this results in a heavy, crushing, suffocating, yet extremely driven, highly energetic, and frenetic sound. What is interesting in this regard is the fact that even though these riffs have hefty amounts of chunk in them, they are not blunt instruments, like they're not there to do your head in. And in fact, the chord progressions involved in creating these riffs lend themselves quite readily, despite being crushingly heavy, to melodic and even emotive passages that the band uses to great effect. A great example of this would be the track Apocalypsis, which opens up as more or less as a heavy-hitting black metal track, but quickly ventures out into atmospheric territories, transitioning seamlessly from one heavy mode to a highly evocative and even emotive mode. Another good example is the track Missio Dei, which provides the listener with the most virile strain of hatred this side of Watain. The track actually proceeds with the subtlety and speed of a runaway train, just grimly bludgeoning the listener to a bloody pulp with the heavy-set crushing riffs and relentless blast beats. But there is a repeated section that I think can actually pass muster for a hook, in which the band decides to take a far more atmospheric route, managing to both maintain their violence, but provide nimble and sort of emotional and highly melodic guitar work to balance that out. And this, coupled with the repeated words, "Father, forgive me for what I did and what I am about to do," creates an interesting, if kind of frightening, but highly immersive experience. This is actually one of the greatest strengths and one of the best aspects of this album comes to the fore, and that is the sheer fucking strength of Gravenchalice's songwriting. Not only are these tracks highly cohesive to the point where I have not seen an album this cohesive and this fully realized in quite some time, they also allow the band to take the tracks wherever they want to go, allowing for the album to remain dynamic, engaging, and interesting throughout its admittedly meager run. Where individual songwriting is concerned, this type of cohesion actually lends two sets of benefits. The first is that no matter where the band wants to take these songs, whether they want to go in a far more death metal and technically inclined passage as in the transitional bridge of Gravuro Monet, or the more emotive atmospheric black metal renditions that are heard on Behind Our Veil or Apocalypsis, or the epic finish of Missio Dei where the band just throws caution to the wind and ends everything on a crescendo, everything fits together perfectly. The second benefit yielded by the good and conscious choices made during the songwriting phase allow Gravenchalice to execute smooth transitions not only between the various passages scattered throughout the songs, but between different modes altogether, creating a natural flow from start to finish, not only at a song level, but on an album level as well. Instead of opting for a far more progressive, or at least traditionally progressive, songwriting where lots of abrupt shifts is the norm, Gravenchalice opts to allow the various passages, riffs, and sections that they come up with to evolve naturally and therefore to lead from one to the other as smoothly as possible. And the best possible example of this is the opening track, Gravuro Monet, which I am sure I am misremembering the title of. The opening of this first track that is going to set the stage for the rest of the album is the perfect microcosm to demonstrate what Gravenchalice songwriting is all about. It opens with a nice dissonant black metal style riff and adequate drumming, and instead of shifting to something else entirely or using that as a jump off point to pound your head in, basically, the band instead evolves this passage in several stages, and each of these stages brings you closer to the actual explosive, grim, heavy-set, fast-paced, high-impact riff that they are going to use as the main anchor of this track. Not only are they going to repeat the abysmal, borderline apocalyptic anchor riff throughout the track, they're going to take lots of interesting and seemingly unrelated detours in between, always leading away from and leading towards this section, and no matter where they take it, everything is going to fit fucking perfectly. The rest of the track list are no slouches either. Take Apocalypsis, for example. It starts out as a black metal track that moves on to more Atmo Black-like territories before culminating in a bridge section, where everything is softer and more subdued. This bridge section, however, in turn leads up to a tension-building phase where energetic drumming and dissonant guitars build up tension to a crescendo of a finisher, where it ends up in a far more emotive, far more expansive, far more forlorn, and interestingly enough, soft-spoken little passage. To say nothing of the closing track Vanitas that has been separated into two distinct sections, divided by a stretch of silence broken up only by the subtlest of cymbal touches. This is the band's method of letting go of everything, but maintaining that thinnest little thread to pull everything back into focus and to lead the album to its glorious, glorious conclusion. Like, this is some serious songwriting talent displayed here, and that is why Apparition has it going on. Another aspect of the sound that aids greatly in the engagement levels of these tracks is the use of secondary guitars with soft, almost funky, twangy little tones injecting liberal amounts of melody on top of the black metal proceedings. And therein, the use of stereo space becomes somewhat of an issue. See, for the most part, with the exception of Missio Dei, these guitar parts are panned hard right or hard left, proving to you once again that I don't really know my right from my left, which is probably why I didn't get a driver's license. Now, the thing about panning something to the hard left or the hard right, right, okay, is the fact that when you do that, these elements don't have anything to compete against, so their volume seems to rise. So in order to make them mesh better with the mix overall, you have to pull them down a little bit. Unfortunately, Gravenchalice has pretty much murdered these elements to the point where the central elements, the guitars, the vocals, and the drums, more or less overshadow them at times. And that is quite a shame, because there are lots of cool, interesting little melodies hidden in these passages, but they are struggling to get through the mix. They are struggling to be heard. And the fact that they're not as prominent as they could have been is a goddamn shame. And in fact, in the track Apocalypsis, it is actually demonstrated how not panning them so hard to the right or left would have benefited these elements, because it does feature a secondary guitar element, but it is panned to the left of the center, and as a result, some of it bleeds into the central sound and it becomes far more prominent than it would have been if it had been panned hard. I know, me bitching about production, but guys, come on. You have constructed something beautiful here. Just a little bit more prominent bass and allowing these elements to come through a little bit more clearly, making them pop, would have benefited your already pretty fucking awesome sound greatly. So, something to consider for the future. So with all of that said, who do I recommend this to? Well, if you're a black metal fan, you should be all over this fucking thing. If you like more atmospheric renditions of black metal, you should be all over this thing. If you like the more doomier versions of black metal and or doom metal influences in your black metal, you should be all over this thing. If you are just dipping your toes in black metal, you should still listen to this, because at half an hour, it is not too long, it is not too oppressive, and it is a wonderful example of what the genre is capable of. As always, there's a Bandcamp link in the description down below. Why don't you go click that, go listen to this, and come back and tell me if I'm really full of shit and just pulling your leg. If you are already a fan of Gravenchalice, why don't you let me know in what ways this album has changed your life. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe, as it always helps. And as always, it's Eason. Peace out.